Well, with us this afternoon is, or I should say today. With us today is Tara Westover. She is author of Educated and coming to us from a very different, as you would say, background. Your family were survivalists in Idaho. I wanted to ask, what part of Idaho?
Southern Idaho, so kind of out in the middle of nowhere, pretty remote.
Okay, and describe to me your childhood.
So I was raised the youngest of 7 children on a really beautiful mountain in southern Idaho. And in a lot of ways, it was just this really amazing, beautiful childhood. You know, my dad had a junkyard that we would play in that was kind of an exotic playground. And then my mother was an herbalist and a midwife. And we spent a lot of time when I was young gathering herbs that she could make into tinctures. But you know, as normal as that life seemed to me at the time, as I grew older, I would realize there were some things about it that were pretty unusual. So because my dad had some kind of radical ideas about the government, we were never allowed to go to school, we were never allowed to go to the doctor.
You don't even have a birth certificate.
Yeah, I didn't even have a birth certificate until I was 9 years old. So there were some elements of my childhood that were pretty unusual.
You start to patch them together as you get a little bit older. I heard you talking about a school bus that would go by, and obviously you guys weren't on it. Did you ever feel like you were missing out?
I didn't, because my perspective at the time was that my family was right, that we were living the right way, and that other people in our town who went to school were getting brainwashed by the Illuminati. So, because my dad, you know, he had this idea that those schools had been corrupted by this kind of nefarious organization.
Right.
So I didn't so much think that I was missing out. I thought that we were doing the right thing, and I felt kind of bad for everybody else who was getting brainwashed.
Okay, so you described your dad as having a paranoia. When you got a little bit older, what would you see that would make you feel that way?
Well, I think until I went to the university. When I was 16, I decided I would educate myself. And so I ended up...
Was that okay with your parents?
My dad wasn't thrilled. It was a bit of a struggle. Mostly it was a struggle because I just hadn't received a lot of formal education. I'd been taught to read and we had books in the house, but I just had never had anything like a formal education. I'd never read an essay or written an essay. I'd never taken an exam, nothing like lectures. So in order to get into where I went was BYU, I had to pass the ACT, and I just really was not prepared.
Did you pass it the first time?
No, I got a really bad score, and then I took it a bunch of times and eventually got an okay score. I had to teach myself algebra, which didn't go great.
Wow.
But I did enough to get into the university. But the problem with that was, in order to be admitted to the university, I told them I'd been homeschooled. And then once I was there, I realized I just didn't have the education in place to really cope in that environment. So one of my first lectures that I went to, I raised my hand and asked what the Holocaust was, you know, out loud. Because I'd never heard of it. And I think the other students, you know, they heard that as me being a bit anti-Semitic, actually. They heard it as me kind of denying it, like, what is this? Whereas I meant it very much as, you know, what is this?
I've never learned about this.
I never learned about it. You know, I don't think that my parents were hiding it from me. It just never come up.
Well, you were born Mormon, correct?
Yes, I try to downplay it simply because my dad's kind of radical ideas aren't really representative of Mormonism. I mean, most Mormons go to the doctor, they go to school, they have birth certificates. So I try not to equate kind of Mormonism with the way I was brought up.
Okay, I see. But your mom was very subservient to your father.
My mother was almost incapable of standing up to my dad.
How did that shape your relationship
With my mother? I think it just always made me feel like there were two versions of her. There was the version of her that she was when she was with you, and then there was the version of her that she was when she was with my dad. And you know, which one is the real one is the kind of burning question of my life. I mean, a lot of the story that I tell in the book is about the estrangement that I would eventually, you know, that would occur between me and my parents. We would become estranged, and that would be over a kind of claim of the past, or wrestling over the past, because I would confront my parents about one of my older brothers who'd been violent for many years towards me, towards other people, and my mother would initially believe me until my father got involved and decided that I was lying. And so that question of kind of who is my mother would really be at the heart of how everything would evolve.
So you go to school, you probably felt like an alien, you know, going there, and everyone had been going to school, reading, doing math, and you have to learn life from a whole different perspective. How did that open your mind?
Initially, I think it was just kind of terrifying, and I didn't really have the social skills that I needed. I had a lot of kind of anxiety about being around people. I'd never been around what I would have called, public school kids, because they went to school. I'd never had a friend that went to the public school. So socially, I was not great. And then academically, I just, there were so many things I didn't know or had never heard of. I'd never heard of the civil rights movement, and so I was just really, really behind. And then the other issue, besides kind of being socially awkward and a bit ignorant, was that I didn't really know who I was anymore. And there were a lot of years I was at college where I was kind of strung out between these two identities. When I was at home on the mountain visiting my parents, I felt like everything they did was really natural. Even when they would have these terrible injuries in my dad's scrapyard, and then they would not treat them. Like once my dad was standing next to a car and it exploded in the scrapyard, and he was burned terribly.
Wow.
My family made the decision to treat that at home, and part of me sort of thought, well, maybe that was the right thing to do. Maybe that's what God wanted them to do. And then the other part of me that had been going to the university thought, this is insane. He needs to go to the doctor.
Yeah. So you're fighting the one person that you are and the other that you're becoming.
Exactly.
Wow. How did you, when you found a friend, how did friendships begin to evolve with people?
I think the first friend that I had who was different ideologically than my family I was 17. His name was Charles. It was, of course, a boy. And that was the first time I met someone who I respected, who believed different things than my dad.
Wow.
And that caused a lot of cognitive dissonance. I wasn't quite sure, really how to even reconcile. How could I respect two people who thought different things?
Yeah.
But I think that is what universities and education really offer. That is to say, you get access to different perspectives, and that's what I hadn't had when I was a child. I'd had access only to my father's view. So his view of history was the only view that I ever really learned. And so I think
Which was that the government was against you?
Yeah, so when he said the public schools were run by this evil force, the Illuminati, that they would bring, I had no reason to believe anything different. When he said that doctors were dangerous, that they were trying to harm you, I believed that. And so, the part of my education that I would come to value, the idea of education that I would come to value, isn't so much about classrooms or exams or anything like that, although that's part of it. It's more about that getting access to different points of view and different ways of thinking, and then using all of those perspectives to kind of construct your own mind. And that's something that I didn't have when I was a kid.
They say that children are sponges, and when you give them things that they grab onto it. And I look at you through your book and say, you were like a sponge when you went to college, so much so that you went to get all the way to get your PhD. You've gone to Harvard, you've gone to Cambridge. When you see that word educated on your best-selling novel, what does it mean to you?
Well, so it's a memoir, which I should say is slightly different than a novel, because this is entirely based on my life. But it's, I chose the word educated because I wanted to challenge some of the ways that we think when we hear the word educated. I think the word educated has become almost synonymous with institutionalized for some people, and maybe even a specific set of institutions like Harvard, like Cambridge. It's been associated with these just incredible privileges that some people get and other people don't. And that seems to me like a really sad thing to have ceded to this whole kind of question of inequality and privilege, because education should be the one thing that anyone can get and that people have access to, or even if they don't have access to the institutions, the same access to institutions, what education is very different from what a school is. And so I wanted to write a book that would try to get people to ask a question about what an education is and how is an education different from a school. I did go to some amazing schools, but I don't think that the most important moments of my education necessarily happened at those schools. I think education is a much bigger thing than a classroom or an exam.
Yeah, experiences.
Yeah, again, it's getting access to all those different points of view and those different ways of thinking that would have the biggest impact on me and would change the way that I would think and the way that I would feel. And ultimately, I mentioned that I had this brother who'd been violent, and that was what would cause the estrangement with my family. I think it was that ability of that whole experience of getting access to different points of view and holding on to my own ideas that were different from the ideas of people around me. That is what would ultimately give me the conviction to tell my parents, this is what's happening and we have to stop it, even though in my family it was very much established by then that we either weren't going to talk about that, or we were going to rationalize it, or we were going to euphemize it. And I think it's that kind of mental muscle that you develop to say, other people think this and I think this,
Right.
that I think is just really crucial to an education.
Yeah. Was writing this memoir cathartic for you?
It was. Yeah, it definitely was. I didn't think it would be, but it was. I think that there were a lot of things I had to come to terms with, and they weren't the things I expected. I thought the difficult things, like my relationship with my brother, I thought that would be hard to write about. But what was actually hardest to write about, I think, were the good things about my family, the things I really missed, because I'm estranged from half my family. So those were the things that I found it kind of hard to write about, but I'm glad I did.
You have gone from nobody knowing your name one day to, now so many people know who you are and they want to hear your story and they want to see you. You're on a book tour right now. Is that crazy to think about?
Yeah, it's pretty weird. I mostly don't think about it.
Well, what do you think the connection is that they have with the book or memoir that you wrote?
I think that it might have something to do, I think people want to hear a different story about education. That's one bit of it. I think also the estrangement story. I think there's a lot of stories that people write about difficult decisions with their families and difficult relationships. I think if there's something different about mine, I think it's that I wrote it when I was quite young, and people tend to write these books nearer to the end of their lives. And I think that's really valuable, but it's a really different perspective. And one of the things that's hard about estrangement is not knowing the future and not knowing how the story will end and not knowing is there going to be a car accident, is there going to be something terrible that will happen that will change the way I feel, or how long will it take me to kind of come to terms with the decisions that I've made. And these are the questions that were really driving me when I wrote the book. And I think that they would have been very different if I had written in 20, 30 years, I think, when things had settled more. So I wonder if maybe that's some of what people are identifying with, because it is written at just almost a different time of life.
Yeah, you're coming out from one way of living to a completely different one. What are the things that you enjoy now about life that maybe you didn't get on the farm?
I kind of enjoy a lot of the same things. I really enjoy nature. I have a dog. I really enjoy my dog. I think he brings me more joy than almost anything. And I just enjoy walking outside in green spaces. So that hasn't changed. That's what I enjoyed when I was little. But except instead of a dog, it was, horses and goats. But same principle.
Sure.
I think, beyond that, I think what I've added is books. And I had books when I was growing up, and I had poetry, I had the Bible, and now I have, so many more. And so that's changed, I guess. The library is significantly bigger.
Wow. And your feelings and your thoughts, having perspective on things. You are so bright, I can tell, and you use your words so carefully. Are there reasons for that?
For using words carefully? Well, I do think that how you use words is important. I think it's the reason I chose the title that I did, and I want to be really specific in trying to make the cases that I'm making, both about education, but also about estrangement and about the difficult decisions that people have to make around estrangement. So I think, I think as precise as you can be, it's always better.
How do you not get angry when you're estranged?
I think you can, and I think probably in some cases you should. I think anger has an appropriate role to play. I have a theory about anger. I think anger actually is a self-preservation mechanism. I think it's something that your brain does to get you away from situations and people that might harm you. But I guess I feel like once you're away, once you're safe, you might not necessarily need the anger, and maybe then you can just let go of it and live a better life without it. I kind of feel like I don't have to be angry with my family now, almost because I am estranged from them. It's a strange thing. I have much more positive memories now that I don't have to be arguing with myself all the time. I kind of feel like, if my family were still a part of my life, I would need my anger. I would need it every day. But because I've made that decision and I've accepted it, I kind of feel like I don't need my anger, and I can become a person who has good memories and bad memories both. And that's, for me, that feels like a better way to live.
And honestly, it sounds like a very educated way to think about your life. And because you could always be hurt by it, you could play it out into other parts of your life. Do you have an empathy or a sympathy for your family?
Absolutely. I think that they're good people. And I think, what would happen with my family and the reasons that we would become estranged, I don't think it's a story about how bad people do bad things. I think it's a story about what good people do to keep secrets.
So you are one of 7 children, the youngest. Do you keep in touch with any of your siblings?
3 of my brothers and almost all my aunts and uncles, especially on my mother's side.
Okay. And did any of your other siblings go to college?
2 of my brothers did. My brother Tyler was the first one who went, and he was the one who encouraged me to go. And then another brother of mine also went. We kind of convinced him to go after.
So you have at least your siblings, or some of them, that you're able to still talk to, connect with, and understand, the same thing, what you went through, as opposed to having to explain it to a complete stranger.
Yeah, and I think, my brothers, we had this strange thing where because we didn't go to school, me and 2 of my brothers, once we did go to school, we kind of went all the way. So all 3 of us have PhDs. We just went completely overcompensated, just went nuts. So there is a real symmetry there.
I know that you're on a book signing tour right now, and you're going to let everybody know about Educated, but do you see life beyond the book, and what does it look like?
Oh, I don't know. That's hard to imagine. I think it will probably look a lot like it did before. I think I'll just walk my dog and try to write things and try to have ideas, and I think it will probably just go back to normal, and that'll be a bit of a trip.
You live a long way from Idaho.
I do, yeah. I live in England.
You live in England, and how is life in England for you?
A lot like it is here, kind of rainy.
It was sunny
really
yesterday.
pretty, really pretty.
Oh, that's great. Good. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think I'm all right.
Good, good. Well, thank you for being here, Tara.
No, thank you.
Appreciate it.